I'm Sam.
And I'm Jessica. This is our channel, Wrongful Convictions, and today we'll be covering Pervis Payne's case.
There's kind of two sides of the story, so I'm going to start with the way officers portrayed this at trial. So Sharice Christopher was a 28-year-old divorced single mother raising her two young children, Lacey and Nicholas. Lacey was 2, Nicholas was 3, and they lived in an apartment in Millington, Tennessee. The apartment building that they lived in consisted of 4 units, so there was 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs, kind of a small building. Nancy Wilson, who was the building manager, lived directly underneath the Christopher. Pervis Payne's girlfriend, Bobby Thomas, lived in the apartment next to the Christophers upstairs.
Okay.
Thomas had been in Arkansas for the week, that's where her parents lived, so her and Payne had planned to spend the weekend of June 27th, 1987 together. Payne had left his overnight bag in Thomas's apartment in preparation for the weekend, along with 3 cans of beer. Around 3 p.m. on the 27th, Wilson, the building manager, heard screaming and running coming from the Christopher apartment above her. She states she heard Sharice yell out, get out," to her children. Wilson started to walk towards the apartment, but instead called the police from her own apartment. The dispatcher received her call at 3:23 and immediately sent a squad car to investigate. Wilson heard someone leave the Christopher apartment and run down the stairs as police arrived. Officer Owen was the first to respond to the situation, but he was not told to respond. He was just in the area. He said he was 2 minutes away, so he drove to back up his fellow officers. According to Owen, when he arrived, he saw a black man standing at the top of the stairs on the 2nd floor. We know where this is going.
Yeah.
The man walked down the stairs and out of the building, where Owen saw him covered in blood. He confronted the man, who immediately informed him that he was the complainant. Owen then states he asked the man what happened, and the man took off running. A chase ensued, but the man got away.
Oh no!
Officer Owen radioed for help, and Officer Boyd responded. Officer Boyd was one of the 2 officers that was originally assigned to the case. Since they saw the blood on the man's clothing, they went up to investigate the Christopher apartment. There, they found Clarice, Lacey, and Nicholas all injured. By the time the ambulance arrived, Clarice and Lacey had passed on from blood loss. Clarice had been stabbed over 40 times, Lacey almost 10. There are conflicting reports about whether there was evidence of sexual assault on Clarice at the scene because she was on her period, so it kind of changes the biology of it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
So they're kind of torn about that. Nicholas, however, was still holding on, so he was rushed to a hospital where he received extensive operations. Nicholas was seriously injured. He had also been stabbed, and it had actually gone like completely through his body.
Oh wow.
So, but he was on the operating table from like 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. like for a very long time, and he survived.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Pervis Payne was the man that Officer Owen had seen with blood on his clothing, and he was found later and arrested at his former girlfriend's home. As they arrested him, he repeatedly told officers that he had not killed anyone. Officer Beck, who was Boyd's partner, states that Payne had a quote-unquote wild look about him and was foaming at the mouth. There's some suspicion that that has something to do with drug use, but we'll later kind of see that there were no drugs found in his system on that day. Officers allegedly found cocaine in his pants, which were covered in blood. They found like this dime bag, but it didn't have anything in it. It just had residue of cocaine on it.
It can be anything.
Yeah, like it's not the same as really finding like a ton of cocaine on him.
Yeah. And that's what they make it sound like.
Yeah, exactly. So a forensic serologist states during trial that Charisse and Lacey had type O blood, while Nicholas and Payne had type A blood. Payne's fingerprints were found in the apartment, on the kitchen counter, and on the phone. So Payne's recollection of the events are a little bit different. He does take the stand at trial, so we know sort of exactly from his side what happened. He claims in court that he did not harm any of the Christophers. He's been very steadfast about that. He's never said anything to contradict that. Payne claims he saw a different black man run down the stairs as he was headed up to retrieve his overnight bag, which he left at his girlfriend Bobby Thomas's house. When he heard Nicholas faintly calling for help, because at this point Nicholas was the only one who was sort of awake and able to talk still. So he walked into the Christopher apartment and saw the scene that we described earlier, just an awful, gory mess. In shock, he picked up the phone to get help, but could not remember the number. He knew Clarice and the children slightly because they had played with his girlfriend's kids. He says he felt the need to help Clarice. He felt awful when he saw her. He said it's the worst thing I've ever seen. So at this point, a knife was still lodged in Clarice's neck, the murder weapon. So he removes the knife from her neck, trying to, because at this point she's kind of positioned where she's trying to take it out, but she's like passed out, and so he removes it, thinking that that would be helpful. And then he almost vomits, so the fingerprints on the sink are from him sort of just leaning down and vomiting. And then he checks on the kids. So he says that removing the knife and leaning on the ground to check on the kids was how he got blood on his clothing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So the blood on the clothing matched the blood types, O and A, of the Christophers. He then left the apartment to try banging on doors to find help because he couldn't remember 911. As soon as he began leaving the apartment, though, he saw police drive up to the scene and he panicked. You know, he thought, I'm covered in blood, I'm standing right by the apartment, they're gonna think I did this. Payne states he ran because the cop, who Owen was the first one at the scene, did not believe him that he was not the one who had done it. So he said, you know, I felt threatened, I ran because I didn't know what else to do. As he ran, his bag broke and his belongings fell onto the street. So the state at trial is painting this picture that Payne was drunk and high on cocaine when he went to the Christopher apartment. They believe that Payne made sexual advances on Clarice and was denied. So they allege that that's when the violence ensued, spurred by the kind of drug abuse that they state was happening. However, there are these conflicting reports on whether Payne was intoxicated, because the state is saying, well, we found all these drugs on him. Of course he was, but then you look at the lab results and it's like, well, no, he wasn't.
Nothing,
you know. So yeah, current defense sort of argued that, you know, he's not a drug user, he wasn't intoxicated, whatnot. And the state just is painting this awful picture of him as just an angry, hypersexual, drug-abusing black man.
So now we're going to be talking a little bit about the trial outcome and in general how we believe that racism was involved in this case. And so during Payne's trial, officers painted a picture of the scene as gory and heartbreaking, suggesting Payne was to blame. They used victim impact statements at trial, a practice that is often frowned upon because of its ability to sway a jury. And so the state also showed a videotape of the crime scene at trial. Although Payne had no drugs in his system, they made him out to be a violent, angry black man who was high on cocaine. And so Bobby Thomas testified at the trial that she and Payne did not drink or do drugs, stating that this and the crime committed would be very out of character for him. He had taken care of her and her children like they were his own. So regardless of the evidence to the contrary, Pervis Payne was convicted of murdering Lacey and Charisse Christopher, sentenced to the death penalty as well.
That is so crazy to me that he had no drugs in his system and yet they're still spinning this story. And they're giving all this evidence of like, here's how the crime scene looked, here's how awful this was. Like, it makes sense that that would sway the jury to not really look at the facts, but to look at just, well, this family deserves justice.
Yeah, and I think, like, they're just trying to find someone to blame, and he was there just at the wrong moment. And like, I think it's also crazy that Bobby Thomas testified like for him, and they like didn't even care. Yeah,
he actually had 5 character witnesses.
Yeah,
which is like kind of a lot. Like, I think it was his parents, Bobby, and then 2 other people that I don't know if they were friends or coworkers or whatever. But like, they all were like, he's great. He would never do something like this, you know. But yeah, he was just there.
It just like makes me wonder, like, do these like testimonies even matter in cases where it's like a black man? Because like from this and like from a lot of things that have been going on, it doesn't really seem that way.
Yeah. He's seen her.
Yeah, why would you stab someone that much if you don't know them?
Yeah,
unless you're like insane. Like, I don't know.
It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, there was obviously some motive to harm her severe. Like, it wasn't just like, I woke up and decided to murder somebody today. Like, it's different.
I think that's like what a lot of people think murder cases are like. Like, it's like, oh, like just some crazy person decides to like kill someone, but like what people don't realize is there's just like so much planning goes behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important in this aspect, because like this man wasn't even from there, like in the area.
It really doesn't even make sense that they didn't investigate any other suspects. Like, they saw him at the scene and they said, well, that's our guy, but like, it really does make sense when you think about the way the crime was committed and just like how brutal it was.
Yeah. So Pervis Payne has maintained his innocence for over 30 years while sitting on death row. His case was tried in Shelby County, which has a long history of racism, unfortunately. It is among the 25 counties in the country with the most recorded lynchings between 1877 and 1950, which is just like ridiculous.
I mean, that just like shows that there's very clear history of racism in the town and probably in the police force.
That's literally,
you know, the court system.
Yeah, over 100 years basically. Like, insane. So the prosecution in his case played on this racism by employing the hypersexual, drug-abusing black man stereotype to make Payne out to be a man capable of such crime. And the victims in this case were white, so the prosecution continually paints this as a violent black man attacking a white woman, a trope which has been seen countless times in wrongful convictions in counties with similar racist pasts. So Mr. Payne, however, was not a violent person, and he had no motive to harm the Christophers, obviously.
Right, he barely knew her.
Yeah. And so the prosecution claimed he harmed her after she refused his sexual advances, his aggression triggered by drugs. However, no drugs, again, were found in Payne's system that day, and he had no prior history of drug use, so it's really just confusing how they're even using that against him. And the use of racial stereotypes, like the one detailed above, contribute to wrongful convictions, as innocent black folks are 7 times more likely to be convicted than their white counterparts, which is just, I mean, it's the reality, but it is just, it's so frustrating.
Yeah,
and just in general, black people are much more likely to receive the death penalty. When appealing Payne's case, lawyers requested DNA from the crime scene be tested after the testing technology had advanced, which makes sense because the case was so old.
Right.
And so after they submitted these requests, some of the evidence from the scene mysteriously went missing.
Of course it did.
Specifically, a bag of the victim's fingernails clippings were missing, and this would likely still have DNA under them. In addition, other DNA evidence found on the murder weapon, which was tested last September, did not match Payne, inflicting a male suspect. However, it was too degraded to identify the suspect from the FBI database. Yeah. Also, the evidence that Mr. Payne is living with an intellectual disability was presented during the trial and subsequent appeals. His score on an intelligence test administered by a psychologist was 78. A score of 75 indicates a person is mentally handicapped. And so, in general, they just weren't really taking into consideration that he does have an intellectual disability.
Yeah, I mean, that influences a ton, because it's like, how much is he really comprehending of
the situation
that he walked into? Like, I feel like a lot of people in this case think about how he couldn't remember the phone number.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
You know, and I feel like that, you know, when you're just thinking about it, it seems a little suspicious.
Yeah.
But when you think, well, he was struggling with this handicap, you know, it's like it makes sense that maybe he would in a panicked moment
not
remember.
Exactly. The same psychologist administered a personality test as well, after which he concluded Payne was less intelligent than the score of 78 had suggested, making him mentally handicapped. He said Payne was naive and one of the most polite inmates he had ever talked to. In Tennessee, it is unlawful to sentence someone with an intellectual disability to the death penalty, so Payne should never have been even handed this verdict. And I guess it's just like really frustrating that isn't being taken into consideration just because this case is so old, and it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I mean they've brought that up in so many of his appeals. Like, well, he has this intellectual disability, take him off of death row, and they just keep denying it.
I just don't know how that's even legal.
I know. I'm like, it just makes no sense to me.
Payne was granted a stay of execution by Governor Lee due to COVID-19, but this stay expired on April 9th. Payne remains on the death row and he needs our help. And so, in general, our channel really wants to focus on cases that are, you know, like not getting as much attention. And we do kind of want to talk about George Floyd as well, because we are generally really happy that his family was able to get justice and heal. But real justice in our case, we believe, is that George Floyd would be alive and that this wouldn't have happened in the first place.
Absolutely.
And so we just want to shine light on some cases that aren't receiving as much attention as Floyd's case. And we, because in general, this is still happening. And that's the reality. This is still happening all over the place. And something that happened even after George Floyd was given justice, Ma'Khia Bryant was killed shortly after. And so this is like something that is still happening, and so the question becomes like, is this really justice if it's still happening?
Yeah, and it's like, these are real people. I feel like it's so easy when you listen to true crime or you listen to things like that to think of these people as like removed from you, or when you see things on the news, but it's like, these are real people and they're suffering.
Exactly.
And it has not ended, and it needs serious work to get to a point where it could end.
So we just want to mention some ways that you guys can get involved. In the next little slide, we have a few ways that you guys can get involved, but in general, we just want you guys to be able to support this person as much as possible. Sign petitions, send it to your friends, post about it on Twitter and social media, and donate if you can, if you have that means.
Yeah, we'll have all of the links in the video as well as in the description that you guys can click on to sign petitions, donate to the family, just help in any way you can. There's also phone numbers to call to just demand justice, demand that Pervis Payne be removed from death row and receive a new trial. Okay guys, thank you so much for listening to our video today. We will link all of the sources where we got just facts about the case, everything below in the description box. So if you want to read more, go ahead and check those out.
Thank you.